Hey, my name is Noah Bennett. I'm 26, and I fix cars for a living at a small garage on Clement Street in South Columbus, Ohio. Oil changes, brake jobs, the occasional transmission that sounds like it's chewing rocks. Nothing glamorous. Most days I come home with grease under my fingernails and the smell of metal on my clothes. I don't mind it. It's steady work, and steady is something I learned to appreciate after years of moving from one rented room to another. The house I live in used to belong to my uncle. He sold it to me cheap 3 years ago when he moved to Arizona. The paint on the outside has faded to a tired gray. The back fence leans a little, and the living room is small enough that 2 extra people make it feel crowded. But it's mine. After so many years of other people's walls and other people's rules, having a door I can lock and a roof that doesn't leak feels like luxury. I live alone. Not because I hate company, but because I got used to the quiet. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat something simple, tinker with whatever needs fixing in the garage, then sleep. I didn't expect anything to change. I didn't think I needed anyone to walk into my life and rearrange it. The house next door, number 14, belongs to Jennifer Davis. She moved in about 8 months ago. We weren't close, just the kind of neighbors who nod when we pass each other in the driveway or pick up each other's mail when it gets left in the wrong box. I knew she worked as a freelance designer because she mentioned it once when I helped her jumpstart her old Civic. She's quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice small things, like the way she always sits by the front window with her laptop and a black coffee, or how she replaced the dead plant in front of her house with a new one after it died in April. I don't know why I remembered that. Maybe because it said something about her, that even when things die on her, she tries again. That night in July was thick and heavy, the kind of heat that sits on your skin and doesn't move. My air conditioner was running, but not doing much. I stood in the open garage with a warm can of soda, watching the last of the sunlight turn the sidewalk gold. Then I heard the noise from next door. A heavy thud. A cardboard box came flying out of Jennifer's front door and landed on the porch steps, lid popping open. Books slid across the concrete. Another thud. A gray duffel bag hit the grass. Then a lamp, its shade tilted sideways like it was embarrassed to be there. I set the soda can down on the workbench. Her front door swung wide. A man's voice came from inside, not clear enough to make out the words, but loud enough to carry the sound of someone used to getting his way. Jennifer backed out onto the porch, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other clutching a purse. Her face looked drained. Her shirt was wrinkled like she'd already had a day that lasted too long. The door slammed shut behind her. She stood there on the porch, staring at the pile of her things scattered across the lawn. She didn't yell. She didn't pound on the door. She didn't cry. She just stood completely still, like she was still trying to understand how her life had ended up outside in cardboard boxes. That silence bothered me more than anything. I walked across my yard and stopped at the line between our properties. Jennifer? She turned. It took her a second to register who I was. Noah. Her voice was rough. Sorry, I didn't mean to make noise. I looked at the mess on the grass, then back at her. You don't have to apologize. What happened? She glanced at the locked door. The landlord changed the locks. Does he have the right to do that? She gave a small, tired laugh that didn't reach her eyes. He says he does. 3 days ago, he told me rent was going up $400 starting next month. I asked for it in writing. Today, he showed up with a locksmith. Your lease still has time left, right? 2 months. Then that's illegal. Maybe. She bent down and picked up one of the books, brushing dirt off the cover. But knowing it's illegal doesn't get me back inside tonight. I didn't have an answer for that. The streetlights had come on, casting a pale glow across her face. The lamp still lay on its side in the grass, looking strangely sad. A toiletry bag had come unzipped, a bottle of shampoo half spilled onto the ground. Everything she could reach right now fit into those few boxes and bags. I looked over at my house. The spare bedroom was full of old boxes, a folding table, and winter coats I never unpacked. It wasn't much, but it had a bed, a door that locked from the inside, and a window that looked out onto the backyard. More importantly, it was safer than standing out here on a hot porch with nowhere to go. I knew how this could sound. I was a man living alone. She was a woman who had just been thrown out of her house. If I wasn't careful, the offer could come across wrong. But if I walked back inside and closed the door, telling myself it wasn't my problem, I'd hate myself for it. So I said it. Move into my place tonight. Jennifer's head snapped up. What? Just for tonight, you can take the spare room. It has a lock. I'll clear it out right now. You don't have to decide anything long term. You just shouldn't sleep out here. She looked at me like I'd said something too strange to believe. Noah, that's not funny. I'm not joking. I don't even know you. You know I've lived next door for 8 months and never caused you any trouble. That's a pretty low bar. It's still a starting point. She turned her face away, lips pressed tight. I could see her thinking, not whether she trusted me yet, but whether she had enough pride left to say no. I'll call a friend, she said. Fine. I can wait here until they come. She pulled out her phone. The battery was low. She tried one number, no answer. Tried another, spoke for a few seconds. I caught fragments. Too far, my car's making noise. No, I'll figure it out. She hung up. My friend's in Dayton, almost an hour away, and my car's been making a weird sound. I don't want to drive that far tonight. I nodded. Then stay at my place. One night. She looked at the boxes, then at the locked house. After a long moment, she said, quietly, one night. One night. Tomorrow I'll find somewhere else. All right. I didn't push. I went into the garage, grabbed a tarp, and covered what was left of her things so the night dew wouldn't ruin them. Then I carried 2 of the boxes over to my house. Jennifer followed with her duffel and purse. When she stepped inside, she stopped just past the doorway. Her eyes moved over the small kitchen, the worn couch, my work boots by the door, the old fridge with a few bills stuck on it with magnets. I suddenly felt self-conscious about how plain everything looked, but she only said, "Your house is really clean. I live alone. If I don't clean it, nobody else will." She smiled, a small, almost not there smile, but enough to take some of the stiffness out of the air. I led her to the spare room, moved the boxes into the hallway, put fresh sheets on the bed, and showed her where the towels were and how the lock on the door worked. If you need anything, I'm right across the hall. Jennifer set her bag down beside the bed. Thank you. Her voice was soft, but clear. The kind of thank you that comes from someone trying hard not to fall apart. I nodded. Get some rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. I stepped out and pulled the door closed behind me. For a few seconds, I just stood there in the hallway. The house was still quiet, but it wasn't the same quiet I was used to. There was someone else under this roof now. Someone whose life had just been thrown out onto the lawn in cardboard boxes. And I had no idea that the 10-second decision I made tonight was going to change everything I thought I wanted to keep simple. I woke up at 6 like I always do. The house was still dark except for the thin strip of light coming under the spare room door. For a second, I forgot she was there. Then I remembered, and I stood in the kitchen longer than usual staring at the coffee maker. I pulled out 2 mugs instead of 1. I didn't know if she still took her coffee black, but I remembered the time I helped jump her car and she was holding a paper cup from the gas station. No cream, no sugar. I figured it was worth a try. If I was wrong, there was milk in the fridge. The door to the spare room opened at 6:30. Jennifer came out wearing an oversized gray t-shirt and jeans, hair pulled back. There were dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept much. I'm sorry if I woke you, she said. I get up at this time every day. I pushed one of the mugs toward her across the counter. Black, no sugar. If I got it wrong, there's milk. She looked at the mug, then at me. You remembered? You drank it that way once. She took the mug with both hands. Thank you. I made eggs and toast. Normally I ate standing over the sink, but that morning I set 2 plates on the small table. I didn't ask if she was hungry. I just put the food in front of her. Jennifer stared at the plate. I don't want to be a bother. You're not. You're only saying that to be polite. I'm not polite enough to keep it up for long. That made her laugh for real. A small, quiet sound, but it loosened something in the room. After breakfast, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and phone, calling every listing she could find. I left for the garage. All day while I was under cars and arguing with a rusted bolt, part of my mind kept drifting back to her sitting in my kitchen, making call after call, voice steady, even when the answers weren't good. When I got home that evening, the spare room door was open a few inches. I could hear the soft, steady sound of her typing. I hung my keys on the hook by the door. Any luck? She turned in the chair. A few places. Nothing that actually feels right yet. I'm still looking. Your car's still making that noise? Yeah. I can take a look tomorrow after work. She shook her head right away. Noah, you've already done too much. Cars don't fix themselves. I'll pay you. Pay me by not driving it until it's safe. She studied me for a second, then let out a breath. All right. One night turned into two, then three, then a week. Neither of us brought up the just one night rule again. Every day there was something that needed handling first. Another apartment that was already taken, another place with mold in the hallway, another landlord who wanted too much money up front. It was easier to just keep going than to talk about when she would leave. I fixed her car one evening in the garage after the shop closed. Turned out the serpentine belt was about to go. Jennifer stood beside me holding the flashlight, aiming it exactly where I needed without me having to ask twice. Where'd you learn to work on cars? She asked. My dad. He had a small garage in Toledo. I grew up with the smell of motor oil and the sound of him swearing at stuck bolts. Does he still do it? I paused just for a second. No, he passed when I was 21. She lowered the flashlight a little. I'm sorry. It's been a while. She didn't push. She just nodded and lifted the light back to the right spot. I liked that about her. She didn't need to dig just because she was curious. She waited. And the waiting made it easier to talk. Little by little, the house started to have a rhythm that wasn't only mine. In the mornings, I made coffee for both of us. Jennifer worked at the kitchen table or in the spare room. I went to the garage. When I came home, if she hadn't eaten yet, we cooked something simple together. Pasta, fried rice, scrambled eggs. One night she made tomato soup. The smell filled the whole house. I stood outside the door for a minute before I walked in, just breathing it in. You don't have to cook for me, I told her. I cooked for me. You're just eating the leftovers. Then thank you for letting me eat your leftovers. She smiled. At first her smiles were careful, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up space in someone else's house. But every day they came a little easier. One night, a storm knocked the power out across the whole neighborhood. Everything went black except for the sound of rain hammering the windows. I found some candles in a kitchen drawer. Jennifer used the flashlight on her phone. We sat at the table in the small circle of yellow light, listening to the rain. She told me about her work. How she used to work at an advertising agency but quit after a year because everything felt like it was being turned into something empty to sell. Now she did logos and websites and posters for small bakeries, clinics, and community groups. The money isn't steady, she said, but at least I feel like I'm making something that matters. I nodded. Unsteady income is the kind of thing people like to take advantage of. She looked at the candle flame. Gary knew that. Gary Young was the landlord. She told me he owned several houses in the neighborhood. She'd heard other tenants complain about sudden rent increases and kept deposits, but she had thought if she just paid on time and stayed quiet, she would be fine. I thought if I lived small and didn't cause problems, people would leave me alone, she said. I looked at her across the table. It wasn't your fault. She gave a tired smile. You say that like it's easy to believe. It's not easy, but it's true. She was quiet for a long time. Then she told me about Stephen, her ex. They had been together for 2 years. He never hit her. He never screamed in public. But he had a way of making her doubt everything she felt. If she was sad, he said she was too sensitive. If she was angry, he said she was overreacting. If she wanted to leave, he said no one else would put up with her. By the time she finally left, she didn't trust her own judgment anymore. I would look at something that was clearly wrong and still wonder if maybe I was the one making it into a problem, she said. I don't know how to say the right soft things, so I just told her the truth. Stephen sounds like someone who was really good at making other people feel small. Jennifer looked at me in the candlelight. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. Yeah, that's exactly what he was. After that night, something between us shifted. It wasn't big or loud. The house just didn't feel like temporary shelter anymore. It felt like a place where she could breathe. 2 weeks after the night she got locked out, Jennifer found a small studio 10 minutes away. 6-month lease, rent she could manage, a building manager who actually answered the phone. When she told me, I was standing at the sink washing dishes. "That's really good," I said, and I meant it. She needed her own space. She needed to feel like her life was back in her hands. But that night, while she packed her things out of the spare room, the house started to feel too big again. The day she moved, I borrowed the shop truck and helped carry everything. The studio was small and plain, white walls, a window that looked out at the parking lot. Nothing special, but it was clean and the lock worked. Jennifer stood in the middle of the empty room and looked around. "It's not much, but it's yours." She turned to me. Her eyes softened. "Yeah, it's mine." I helped her set up the desk, connect the Wi-Fi, check the locks. Before I left, she stood in the doorway. "Noah." I turned. "Thank you for not turning your help into something I owed you." The words stopped me for a second. "I never wanted you to owe me." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm thanking you." I drove home alone. When I opened the front door, the kitchen was quiet. No typing. No second coffee mug on the counter. No smell of the mint tea she liked to drink in the evenings. I told myself this was how it was supposed to be. But right doesn't always mean it doesn't hurt. After Jennifer moved out, we still saw each other. It started with small, practical reasons. She had left a few boxes of books and a lamp in my garage. Then she needed to borrow a mixing bowl. Then I stopped by to check on a leaking faucet in her studio. Then one of us would text the other. "I made too much food. Have you eaten?" It wasn't dating. It wasn't even clear what it was. It was just two people finding reasons not to disappear from each other's lives completely. One Tuesday evening, she came over to return the glass bowl she had borrowed. She planned to drop it off and leave, but the weather had finally cooled after weeks of heavy heat. I was sitting on the back steps with 2 cold cans of soda. "I have an extra," I said. "You always have an extra?" "Only when I guess someone might be returning a bowl." She smiled and sat down beside me. We watched the maple tree in the backyard. The leaves were still mostly green, but a few at the tips had started turning. In the distance, we could hear cars on the main road and the sound of crickets in the bushes. Someone nearby had just mowed their lawn. Jennifer asked, "How long have you lived here?" 3 years. "Do you like it?" "I like that it doesn't ask much from me." She tilted her head. "That sounds sad." I gave a small laugh. "Maybe." She didn't push right away. After a while, I found myself talking anyway. After my dad died, I felt like I lost my direction. He left me some money. Not a lot. I bought this house from my uncle cheap. At the time, I thought if I just had one fixed place, everything else would settle. So I went to work, paid the bills, and fixed things. Doors, roof, pipes. I fixed the house the same way I was trying to fix myself. Jennifer looked at me carefully. Did it work? I looked down at my hands, at the calluses and old scars from years of turning wrenches. Some parts, but there are things you can't fix with a wrench. She didn't say, "I understand," like it was something people say to be polite. She just sat there and let the words exist between us. After that night, I started noticing how often I thought about her. I caught myself listening for her car on the street. I checked if the light was on in her studio window when I drove past. One time I went to the grocery store and bought the brand of mint tea she liked, then stood in my own kitchen staring at the box like an idiot. I liked her. The realization didn't hit like lightning. It came slowly, the way water rises in a dark room. By the time I noticed, my feet were already wet, but I didn't know what to do with it. Jennifer had just gotten out of a relationship that made her doubt herself. She had been thrown out of her home. She had finally gotten a place of her own back. The last thing she needed was another man stepping into her life with feelings that could easily turn into another trap. So I started creating distance. Not all at once, not cold. I just stopped texting first. Stopped asking if she wanted to eat together. Kept my replies shorter. When she came by, I was still polite, but I didn't try to keep her there longer than necessary. Jennifer noticed. Of course she noticed. Someone who had lived with Stephen for 2 years would be sensitive to every shift in tone. Every shorter message, every evening that used to happen but suddenly didn't. She pulled back too. The evenings on the back steps became less frequent. I told myself it was the right thing. She needed independence. I needed to not complicate her life. But the house started feeling quiet again in a way it hadn't before. And now I knew exactly what was missing. One Wednesday morning, the garage lost power because they were working on the lines nearby. The owner sent us home early. I came back and was changing the air filter on my own truck when I saw a black SUV parked in front of Jennifer's studio building. A man in his 50s got out. Expensive shirt, soft stomach, hair neatly combed. He stood beside the car and looked around like the whole neighborhood owed him something. Jennifer came out of the building carrying her laptop bag. When she saw him, she stopped. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but my body understood before my ears did. She went still. Her shoulders pulled in slightly. Her chin lifted, not out of confidence, but because she was reminding herself not to step back. The man walked toward her too quickly. His hands moved like he was explaining something reasonable, but his feet were already blocking her path. I put the wrench down. I walked across the street. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just walked like a neighbor coming over to ask a normal question. When I got close, Jennifer saw me. For a second, something flashed across her face. Relief? Then worry. "Noah," she said. I stopped beside her, not in front of her like she couldn't handle this herself, just next to her. "Everything okay?" The man turned to me. "We're having a private conversation." I looked at Jennifer. "Do you want to talk?" She pressed her lips together. "No." I turned back to the man. "Then the conversation is over." He gave a thin smile. "Who are you?" "Neighbor." "This doesn't concern you." It usually doesn't. But when one person says they don't want to talk and the other person is still standing in their way, it starts to concern the person standing nearby. His eyes cooled. Jennifer spoke, her voice even but slightly unsteady. "Gary, just go. From now on, any contact goes through email." So this was Gary Young. He looked at her, then at me. "You think having this mechanic standing next to you changes anything?" I answered before she could. "No. I think the law is what changes things. I'm just here to make sure she can get to her car if she wants to." Gary stared at me for a few more seconds. Finally, he stepped back. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he said to Jennifer. "Good," she answered. "I'll be talking to mine too." After he drove away, her hands were shaking so badly she dropped her keys. I bent down and picked them up. "You okay?" "No." She gave a weak laugh. "But I'm still standing." I looked at her. "You don't have to stand alone." She studied me for a long moment. "You pulled away." I stayed quiet. "Noah, if you're keeping distance because you think I'm weak, you're wrong. If you're keeping distance because you're scared of yourself, then at least be honest about it." I looked down at the hot pavement. "I was afraid I'd become another problem in your life." "You don't get to decide for me what counts as a problem." The words made me lift my head. Jennifer let out a long breath. "It took me a long time to learn how to trust my own feelings again. Don't help me by making me doubt them." I wanted to apologize. I wanted to tell her I liked her. I wanted to tell her the house had felt cold since the day she left. But standing in a parking lot right after Gary had just driven away, none of those words felt right to say out loud. So I only said, "You're right, I'm sorry." She nodded. Not soft yet, but she didn't walk away either. 2 days later, the lawsuit papers arrived. Gary Young was suing Jennifer for $4,800 for damaging the lock, property destruction, and breach of lease. She called me in the middle of the day. Her voice was too calm. I knew she was close to breaking. "I don't have money for a lawyer," she said. I was at the garage, hands covered in oil. "Where are you right now?" "Studio." "I'm coming over." "Noah, you're working." "I'm taking lunch." "You don't have to." "Jennifer, I'm coming over." I hung up, asked the owner for an hour off, and drove straight to her building. She was sitting on the front steps with the folded papers in her hands. I read them twice. The legal language was thick and deliberately intimidating, the kind of writing meant to make you feel like you've already lost before you even start. I called Michael Reed, an old classmate who now worked as a paralegal for an office that handled tenant disputes. He told us to come in. In Michael's small office, things became clearer. He read the papers, searched Gary Young's name on his computer, and stayed quiet for so long I started to get uncomfortable. Finally, he said, "This isn't the first time he's done this." Jennifer sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "In the last 3 years, Gary Young has sued at least 4 former tenants. Same pattern. Raises rent without proper notice. When they push back, he locks them out, keeps the deposit, and sues for damages." "Did he win?" I asked. "Most of the time. Because the tenants didn't have lawyers, didn't have paperwork, or were too scared of the cost and just paid." Jennifer stared at the papers in front of her. Her shoulders seemed to shrink. "I can't pay almost $5,000. Michael said, "You might not have to. If we can prove this is a pattern, you can countersue for wrongful eviction, harassment, and illegally withholding the deposit. But it won't be easy." Jennifer gave a small, humorless laugh. "I'm already too tired to fight." I looked at her. "Then rest for a bit. Then fight." She turned to me. "Why are you doing this?" I could have said because it was right, because Gary was wrong, because she was my neighbor. But none of those answers were complete anymore. I spoke slowly. "Because that night, when you were standing in the yard with your things thrown outside, I had 10 seconds to decide what kind of person I was. And I didn't want to be the person who closed the door. I still don't." Jennifer looked at me. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. Michael tapped his fingers lightly on the desk. "All right, then we start with evidence. Lease, messages, photos. Who saw what happened that night?" I said, "I did." Jennifer turned to me. "You'll have to testify." "I know." "Gary might drag you into it." "He already dragged you into it first. I'm just standing where I should have stood from the beginning." For the first time in weeks, Jennifer reached over and took my hand. Not because she was weak, but like an agreement. From that moment on, we were no longer two neighbors who had accidentally gotten tangled up in each other's lives. We were standing on the same side. The weeks after that afternoon in the parking lot were filled with paper, phone calls, emails, and long evenings at my kitchen table. Jennifer started bringing her laptop over almost every night. I dug out the old security camera footage from the garage. We were lucky. The camera had caught part of the night she was locked out. Gary standing at the door, the locksmith. Her belongings being thrown onto the grass Jennifer left standing outside. The audio wasn't perfect, but the images were enough to contradict Gary's version of events. Michael found 2 other former tenants who had gone through almost the same thing. Brenda Scott, an older woman who had lost nearly $3,000 because she couldn't afford to keep fighting. James Miller, who had ended up moving in with his sister after Gary kept his deposit and sued him for damages that were already there before he moved in. Both of them were scared at first, but when they heard Jennifer had decided to fight back, they agreed to tell their stories. Every evening after work, Jennifer and I sat at the table sorting documents by date. Lease, text messages about the rent increase, photos of her things on the lawn, the lawsuit papers, list of witnesses. The more we worked, the clearer it became that Gary didn't just get greedy with one person. He chose people he thought wouldn't fight back. People with less money, fewer connections, less ability to push back. One night, Jennifer was reading through Gary's old messages again. Her hands started to shake. "He writes like I'm the one who should be grateful," she said. "Like I caused all of this." I closed the laptop gently. "That's how people like Gary win? They make you explain until you're too tired to keep going." She looked at me. "Stephen used to do the same thing." I stayed quiet. He didn't sue me. He didn't lock me out. But he had this way of turning everything into my fault. If he forgot my birthday, it was because I expected too much. If he talked to his ex behind my back, it was because I was controlling. If I cried, it was because I liked the drama. She took a deep breath. "Gary makes me feel that same way again. Like I have to prove I'm not crazy." I walked around the table and sat down next to her. "You're not crazy. You only say that because you believe me." "True. What if I didn't have proof?" "I'd still believe you." Jennifer looked at me. The silence stretched. "Why?" The question left me nowhere to hide. I looked at her hand resting on the stack of papers, at the blue ink stain on her thumb, at the exhaustion in her eyes and the strength she was still trying to hold on to. "Because I know you," I said. "Not everything, but enough to know you're not making this up to cause trouble. Enough to know you've already spent too much time doubting yourself. and enough to know I don't want to stand on the outside of your life like someone who only helps when it's convenient. Jennifer let out a slow breath. Noah. I pulled away because I was scared, I continued. I thought I was protecting you. But really, I was just protecting myself from wanting you too much. The kitchen was quiet except for the low hum of the window air conditioner. Outside, the crickets were loud. I like you, I said. Not because you needed help. Not because you showed up on my porch that night. I like the way you tried to grow something new even after the first plant died. I like that you drink black coffee and still make a face like it personally offended you, but you drink it anyway. I like that you read every line of a contract like you're preparing for battle. I like that this house feels warmer when you're in it. Jennifer's eyes were wet. You're saying it too late. I know, but it's still the right time. She put her hand over mine. We didn't kiss that night. It didn't feel like the kind of moment that needed to be rushed. After everything she had been through, feelings couldn't be another wave that swept her away. It had to be a door she could choose to walk through. Before she left for the studio that night, Jennifer stood in the doorway. I like you too, she said. But there will be days I get scared. Days I doubt. Days I want to run before I can be left again. I'll have days I go quiet instead of talking. Days I try to decide things alone. Days I think safety matters more than happiness. So, we're going to be difficult. Probably. She laughed softly, then stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't like a scene from a movie. No music, no rain, no big promises. Just the old porch light, the smell of motor oil still on my shirt, and her hair brushing against my chin. But I remembered it for a long time, because for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was fixing something broken. I felt like I was building something new. The fight with Gary didn't get easier after that. If anything, he became more aggressive once he knew Jennifer was fighting back. He sent more demands. Then he tried to file something claiming she was harassing him. Michael read it and actually laughed at how obvious it was, but Jennifer didn't laugh. One afternoon, Steven showed up at her studio. I wasn't there. She told me about it later. He said he heard she was going to court and just wanted to help her think carefully. Every sentence was wrapped in soft concern that still cut. Are you sure you're strong enough for this? Court will dig up everything. You've always let your emotions run away with you. Maybe that mechanic guy just likes feeling like a hero. Jennifer tried to close the door. Steven put his foot in the way. This time she didn't stay frozen in silence. She looked straight at him and said, "Take your foot out of my doorway. If you're still standing here in 10 seconds, I'm calling the police." Steven gave her a thin smile. You've changed. Yeah, I trust myself more now. He left. Afterward, she called me. I answered while I was changing a tire for a customer. Steven just came by, she said. I wiped my hands on a rag. Are you okay? I'm fine, but can you come over? I'm on my way. When I got there, Jennifer opened the door. Her face was still pale, but her back was straight. I checked the lock, looked out across the parking lot, then turned and pulled her into a hug. This time, she didn't try to act like she was fine. She rested her forehead against my chest and let out a shaky breath. I made him leave myself, she said. I kissed the top of her head. I know. I was so scared. Scared and still doing it. That's what courage looks like. That night, I brought her back to my house. We ordered pizza and put on an old movie neither of us really watched. Jennifer sat next to me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. When the credits started rolling, she spoke so quietly, I almost missed it. I don't want Gary to win. Then we won't let him. What if we lose? Then we lose standing up. Not because we were scared into silence. She lifted her head and looked at me. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, but it's right. She smiled when she recognized the words I had said to her months ago. A week before the trial, Michael told us some good news. A housing rights lawyer named David Chen had agreed to help Jennifer at a reduced cost because the case showed a clear pattern of targeting multiple tenants. David was direct, sharp-eyed, and carried thick folders everywhere. During one of the prep sessions, David asked Jennifer detailed questions about every timeline, every conversation, every message. At one point, she got so tired she had to step outside to breathe. I started to follow, but David stopped me. Let her come back on her own, he said. She needs to know she can. She came back 5 minutes later, eyes red but voice steady. I'm ready. I watched her sit back down and open her folder again, and I realized the girl who had stood frozen in the yard with her belongings scattered on the grass was no longer in the same place. She was still afraid, but the fear wasn't driving anymore. The night before the trial, Jennifer stayed at my house. We made a simple dinner: spaghetti, salad, garlic bread that I forgot about and burned on one side. She laughed when she saw me scraping the burnt part off with a knife. You're good at fixing cars, but terrible at saving bread. I have a lot of skills. Not all of them work in the kitchen. After we ate, we sat on the back porch. It was cold, late February cold, but not bitter. The maple tree was bare, black branches against the dark sky. Jennifer held my hand inside the pocket of her coat. What if I say the wrong thing tomorrow? She asked. David will fix it. What if they don't believe me? I believe you. Only you believing isn't enough. No, but it's a place to start. She rested her head on my shoulder. That's what you said the first night, too. That living next door for 8 months without causing trouble was a starting point. And look where it led. To court. And burnt pizza. She laughed quietly, then went silent. A moment later, she said, Noah, I love you. I turned to look at her. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. Jennifer wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the bare maple tree like it was easier to say the words to the dark. But her hand was gripping mine tightly. I lifted her hand and kissed the back of it, right over her knuckles. I love you too. This time we kissed under the porch light, in the cold night air, without rushing, without fear. Behind us was the house that used to belong to only one person. In front of us was a difficult day, but right there, in that moment, I knew what I had chosen. Not to save her, but to stay beside her. The trial was on a Monday morning that felt gray and cold. The county courthouse didn't look like it did in movies. No dramatic music, no speeches that made the whole room stand up and clap. Just long hallways, harsh fluorescent lights, hard wooden benches, and tired people carrying folders full of their lives. Jennifer wore a dark blue blazer and a white shirt, her hair pulled back low. She looked calmer than I felt. But when we sat outside the courtroom, I could feel how cold her hands were. I held one of them. You don't have to pretend you're not scared. She looked at me. I know, but if I don't pretend a little, I'm afraid I'll run. Then pretend until you can do it for real. She nodded. Gary arrived with his lawyer, a tall older man named Morrison who spoke like everyone in the room was wasting his valuable time. Gary didn't look at Jennifer. He sat down at the other table, opened his folder, and kept his face cold and confident. That confidence made me angry. David Chen sat beside Jennifer, flipping through his notes one last time. Remember what I told you, he said. Answer the questions. Don't add extra explanations unless you have to. Don't let them pull you into emotions. The facts are strong enough. Jennifer took a deep breath. I understand. Gary's side went first. Morrison tried to paint Jennifer as an unstable tenant who overreacted to a legal rent increase, damaged the lock, and then made up a story about being locked out. He spoke smoothly, using words like property damage, bad faith, and lawful owner. If I didn't already know the truth, it might have sounded clean. But the truth is rarely clean. It lived in the boxes thrown onto the grass that night, in the camera footage from my garage, in the text messages about the illegal rent hike, in the 2 other former tenants sitting in the back row, gripping their bags, waiting to tell their own stories. When Jennifer took the stand, I saw her shoulders tighten. Morrison asked her about her income, her rental history, why she didn't just pay the extra money if she wanted to stay. Every question was wrapped in polite language, but the meaning underneath was clear. She was unstable, difficult to believe, someone who created her own problems. Jennifer answered each one. Sometimes she paused to drink water. Sometimes her fingers twisted together. But she didn't break, Morrison asked. Do you admit that after leaving the apartment you stayed at Mr. Bennett's house? Jennifer answered, I didn't leave the apartment. I was locked out illegally. And yes, I stayed at Noah Bennett's because he gave me a safe place to sleep. Is it true that your relationship with Mr. Bennett later became romantic? David objected immediately, but the judge allowed the question within limits. Jennifer looked straight at Morrison. Yes, But that doesn't change the fact that Gary Young locked me out illegally. Morrison's mouth twitched. Do you think Mr. Bennett is trying to play the hero in this story? Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then she looked across the room at me. Not for long, just long enough to steady herself. No, I think he was the only person that night who didn't look away. The room went still. Morrison moved on. Brenda Scott testified next. She brought a thick folder of printed messages and receipts, organized by date. When Morrison tried to question whether she remembered everything correctly, she pushed her glasses up and opened the folder. I taught elementary school for 36 years, she said. You think I don't know how to keep records? A few people in the back almost laughed. James Miller spoke slowly about being charged for damages that already existed before he moved in. He wasn't angry, he was calm. Somehow that made his story heavier. Then it was my turn. I told the court exactly what I saw that July night. The sound of things being thrown. Jennifer standing on the porch, Gary slamming the door, the boxes on the grass. How I covered her things with a tarp. How she only agreed to stay at my house after she couldn't reach anyone and her car wasn't safe to drive far. Morrison asked, Mr. Bennett, did you already have feelings for Miss Davis at that time? I knew she was my neighbor, that was all. And later? Yes. So, isn't your testimony biased? I looked at him. I'm biased toward the truth. So is the camera in my garage. David played the footage on the screen. It wasn't perfect, but it clearly showed the locksmith, Gary, the belongings on the ground, and Jennifer locked outside. For the first time all morning, Gary lowered his head. David didn't say much in his closing. He simply laid the pieces side by side. The lease that was still valid, the improper rent increase notice, the changed locks, the belongings thrown outside, the lawsuit for damages, and the pattern with other tenants. This is not a single dispute, David said. This is a pattern. A person with power using paperwork, money, and fear to silence others. Ms. Davis is not perfect. None of us in this room are. But she told the truth. And today, the truth has evidence. When the judge finished speaking, I don't remember every word. I only remember Jennifer sitting completely still for a second, like she hadn't understood yet that she had won. Then she started crying. I pulled her into a hug right there in the courtroom. I didn't care if Gary was watching. I didn't care who else was around. She cried into my shirt, shoulders shaking, and I held her as tightly as I could. You won, I said quietly. She shook her head, voice thick. No, we won. Across the room, Brenda Scott wiped her eyes. James Miller patted David on the shoulder. Michael was smiling like he had won something himself. Gary left quickly, his lawyer following. For the first time, he didn't look bigger than everyone else. That afternoon, we didn't celebrate loudly. Jennifer said she was tired. So was I. We bought takeout, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a plastic container of salad, and went back to my house. The kitchen lights were on. It felt warmer than the air outside. Jennifer stood in front of the fridge looking at the mess of notes I had stuck there with magnets. Oil change schedules, Michael's number, a grocery list. In the bottom corner was a small piece of paper she had written before she moved out. Don't forget to buy coffee. Yours is terrible. I had kept it. She touched the note with her fingertips and smiled. You kept this? It was the first serious review I ever got on my coffee. I had to respect it. She turned to look at me. Noah. Yeah? I don't want to go back to the studio tonight. I stepped closer. Then stay. Not because I'm scared. I know. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I know. She looked around the kitchen, the place where everything had started on a hot July night, from a black coffee, from a person who didn't want to be a bother, and another person who didn't know how to say she wasn't a bother at all. I want to stay because I want to be here. I took her hand. Then stay because you want to. A few months later, Jennifer gave up the studio. We didn't rush, we talked about it carefully. She kept a corner of the house for her work. The spare room became a small design space. I painted the walls the soft blue she picked and built a long desk under the window. The lamp that had been thrown onto the grass that night now sat on that desk. The shade was still slightly crooked if you looked closely, but Jennifer wouldn't let me replace it. Leave it, she said. It reminds me I survived that night. I didn't argue. In late spring, we planted lavender in front of the porch. Jennifer chose the plant. I dug the hole awkwardly while she stood beside me laughing because I was good with cars but terrible with plants. Are you sure you know what you're doing? She asked. No, but I'm learning. She crouched down next to me, her hand brushing the dirt. That's a good answer. I turned to look at her. Where'd you get that line from? From the person who once told me I didn't have to stand alone. I smiled and took her hand right there in front of the house. The neighborhood was still quiet. People still mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and waved without stopping to talk too long. But for me, everything had changed. The house that used to be the place I hid from the world now had the sound of Jennifer's keyboard, the smell of her mint tea, her complaints about my bad coffee, and my laughter when she labeled my toolboxes with the wrong names. I used to think safety meant not letting anyone get too close. But it turns out real safety isn't living alone behind walls. Real safety is having someone who knows exactly how scared you are, how clumsy you can be, how messy your past is, and still chooses to sit with you in the old kitchen after a long day. If anyone ever asks where our story began, I won't say it started with a date or a kiss. I'll say it started on a hot, heavy July night when I saw my neighbor standing in the middle of her belongings thrown out on the lawn, and I had 10 seconds to decide what kind of person I was. I opened the door. She walked in. And from that moment on, my house was never cold again.